Welcome, everyone. Another episode of Back and Forth with Becker and Orr. And we're going to go through all the topics, starting with the lead-off topic there, Kevin. How low will oil go? Why don't we just jump right in? I'll pull up the chart, and you can walk us through us here. Talk about what's happened with oil.
Yeah, I mean, as we can see, oil was sitting there, and if you go back to the 2020 timeframe, we actually hit negative oil rates, which we've never had happen before. And then all of a sudden, you started to see the pandemic come around. You got money thrown, interest rates cut, and oil started to zoom all the way up till about the middle of last year, and then started coming off, the fears of recession and everything else. But as we can see, you've got both lines there. You've had that support line as well as the line where you think that you're going to get that expansion. And we've basically been playing around that area all year long. So, back in just about at the beginning of March, we're at that low point. Then we went all the way up and we went over and then we turned around. I mean, that's just sort of the quick synopsis on it.
Yeah, and you can see the green line there that goes back to the 2018 high and acted as resistance a couple times where oil prices kind of bumped into it and faded. And then it had a huge run in 2022, really just the first 6 months of 2022, though. The back half of 2022, oil prices started to roll over. And then that green line acted as support, chopped around there. And then we had that big drop earlier in 23. It hit the turquoise line, which is the pre-COVID high. And then we're right back there, Kevin, right back to that support level. And we've kind of bounced off of it. So talk kind of the bigger picture here, the macro picture. What is creating this? Like, why have the oil prices started to fall over?
I happen to think that, we're finding that oil has become much more of a macro scenario. Everybody's basing this on where they think we're going to be going in a global scenario. Are we going into recession? If we're going into recession, all of a sudden you're pulling back on everything. We're not going to need as much oil out there dealing with it. I mean, the reason you get some of those pops is China's coming back in. Every time you hear that the Chinese economy is picking up, the price of oil is moving up. Every time the U.S. Fed comes out and raises another quarter point, the oil prices go way down because it's that fear of recession. So as opposed to being more of an individualistic thing or country by country, it's now become, I think, more of a global macro scenario. And whether that's a good or bad thing for oil is hard to say.
Yeah, and in my mind, from a technical perspective, like if we're stuck between those two lines, which we have been for the whole year, that kind of reminds me back to where we were early 2021. Tough to get too excited about the energy sector until you're back above that green line, in my opinion. Like if you're kind of chopping around there, which I think is highly likely until we have some kind of resolution on that macro picture you just talked about what's going to happen in the economy. Is there going to be a global recession? How deep will it be? So we have some questions there. I think a choppy oil market is probably the most likely outcome there. And in my mind, technically between those two lines is probably where you'd see a lot of back and forth.
Yeah, exactly. And we're seeing a lot of that in the marketplace right now, even in the stock scenario. You've had some up months, you've had some down months sort of scenario, but we're not getting that huge volatility factor because nobody knows what direction we're in yet. Are we hitting recession? Are we soft landing? Are we going to be coming into a new bull really quick? Once those questions get a little bit more clarity, then I think you'll see breakouts one way or the other.
Yeah, and that kind of wraps up the oil picture. And we have to come back to this, Kevin. The playoffs, we're still in the NHL playoffs, but not in Winnipeg, obviously. That was a rough first series, first 5 games there. But what comes next? That's what's on everyone's mind. Some big trades, a shakeup, a rebuild. What do you think's next for the Jets?
Yeah, I mean, that's the biggest question, right? I mean, how many times can you roll back the same core? I mean, when people have been doing it, they've been doing it sort of, you had that big experience in 2018, you get to the conference final, and then we've really had nothing since. We've tried to do a few reiterations of this, add a few pieces here and there. I think what you're going to have happen is, even though on paper the team still looks very solid, we're proving over the last 5 years that this core doesn't seem to be able to get it done. So I think there's some big decisions to be made, and specifically on players like Hellebuyck, Scheifele, Dubois, as well as Wheeler. So I think over the next month or two, we may see a little bit more clarity on it. And if not, then you may have some fan reaction that's not, as impressed as it might be.
Well, Dubois has already pretty much said he wants to be looking elsewhere. And Hellebuyck said he might not be sticking around if it's a rebuild phase. He wants a cups. He wants a contender. He doesn't want to go through a rebuild. What are your thoughts there?
Yeah, I mean, I think the first thing you got to solve is the Dubois question. I mean, if he's decided that, no, this isn't the place for me, then I think you got to trade him. And if you can do that, you've got to do it before the draft, so you might be able to get draft capital. As for Hellebuyck, even if you can get him to, buy into what's going to go on as a retooling as opposed to a rebuild, I think you can get him here. But you'd probably like that on a shorter term basis than a long term basis, just due to age. So these are some of the factors that I'm sure Cheveldayoff's going to have to consider. And I mean, as much as they want to put it off and say, no, you're going to have to address it, because at the end of the day, people in seats is what's going to drive what's going to go on going forward.
Yeah, and I think fans are getting a little weary for sure. Back to the financial world here. We got to talk about interest rates. We had a Fed meeting. That's the U.S. Central Bank earlier this week. CME Group has a Fed Watch tool, and I pulled this up because it kind of gives you an idea of where the market thinks things are going versus where the central bank thinks things are going. There's an old saying, Kevin, saying you don't fight the Fed, you don't fight the central bank. Well, the market is definitely fighting. This would be looking at futures, and it kind of gives investors reaction, like the probability they think where the Fed will be in December. So end of the year, keep in mind this week the Fed said they're probably going to pause, which means they'll just hold the level, which is the 500 to 525. That's the current band. But if you look up there, Kevin, no one believes them. Every option. And what I highlighted there is that the 500 to 525 level's got a probability of 0. So investors don't think it's an option that they'll actually just hold tight until the end of the year. Across the board, people are looking for various cuts. What's your thoughts there?
Yeah, you put it best. Don't fight the Fed has always been the way to look at things. And you're definitely right. This is what they're doing. They're fighting the Fed. They're saying, no, you can't hold it. And again, I mean, even when we look at this compared to where it might have been 3 to 4 months ago, where everybody thought that the Fed was still going to keep raising and raising, there was no cuts coming in 2023. 2024 might have some cuts. Now we're seeing almost the opposite here. And I think a lot of that has to do with some of the things that have happened recently, like the regional bank crisis that's gone on in the US. All of a sudden, okay, well, regional banks are having problems. How far can the Fed go? They can't continue to do this because you're going to destroy the economy and put severe recessionary pressure there. Now, will that happen? We don't know. I mean, we're going to have to wait. So the pause is there. But yeah, you're right. One of two things has to happen. A, either the Fed's going to hold and that's going to break what the scenario is there, or the Fed's going to rate cut. And if they do that, then you're probably going to see a market rally and you are looking forward to a next bull sort of scenario. So it is funny to see that nobody is believing what the Fed is putting out there in saying right now. And I don't think I've seen this in a very long time.
I mean, look at the most probable option. Again, this is just looking at futures traders, and then the CME Group has a tool which helps people get the probability based on that trading activity. But the 50% mark is a 75 basis point cut by the end of the year. So that the 3 cuts, essentially 75 basis points by the end of the year in terms of a cut. And they said pause. They came out and said, we're just going to hold tight. And the market reacted, you're going to cut 3 times before the end of the year. Like that is a stark difference. So something has to change. Either the Fed does capitulate and they end up being close to what the market thought, so the market's right, or they hold tight and then the market will have to start to price in those higher rates for longer, which could mean a little bit of turbulence for some parts of the stock market. So it's a bit of 6 of one, half dozen of the other, right? You can see right there that right now what the Fed is saying isn't really getting priced in with the overall market.
No, and they've been preaching now for over a year, higher for longer, and it just doesn't seem like anybody's believing what they're going to say. So you're right. One of these two things has to happen. Some form of capitulation is going to go on. And I guess we're going to find how that works over the next couple of months.
Yeah, I think it relates back to the key piece there. We talked about a recession. I think that's what people are worried about, right? Is there an economic recession? If so, rates might come down. If not, well, maybe the higher for longer will actually take place. So it all kind of comes back to that initial question we talked about with the oil, a similar macroeconomic overhang for here as well. I already pulled it on the screen there, Kevin. Guardians of the Galaxy comes out this weekend. Marvel's next big movie. Is it going to have a splash? Is it going to be the summer blockbuster? Or are people just tired of the whole Marvel universe?
Well, I think in some aspects, this is probably going to be a fairly large movie. The last 2 Guardians have done phenomenal. I mean, when it originally came out, nobody knew who it was, and it did great numbers. And people have gotten to know these characters. And this has been one of those Marvel movies. They all have some form of humor, but the characters in here really work well off each other. I think that's going to have a strong box office. I do believe that it's probably going to be the biggest movie of the summer, but there are a variety of other ones still coming up. But the fact that they're starting before summer early, back in the early May stuff, is they want to try and capture that before even going into the Memorial Day long weekend. So I do think that's that point. But as you mentioned earlier, are people tired of the MCU? You know, that could be worrying. I mean, we're 20 plus movies in already.
15
Disney
years.
plus everything else. What can we say?
Yeah, 15 years since the original Iron Man came out in 2008, which is credit of kicking off the MCU. And how many movies and TV series, and eventually people just kind of get a little tired. Do we want to see another movie of this nature? But I do think this one has gotten very good reviews. Many folks are saying it's the best movie since Endgame from the Marvel Universe, which says quite a bit because that harkens back to an era where the Marvel movies were actually quite funny and were entertaining. So
Yeah.
if it isn't back in that vein, I think this specific one will do well, but I'm not sure how much further this phase of the MCU will go, because the last couple of movies really just haven't been well reviewed, and they haven't gotten the big box office they were hoping for.
Yeah, and you're right. It may be that tiring sort of scenario that, we've seen this before, and how many times can you reiterate the same characters? And maybe they do have to do something that you've seen similar in the Spider-Man or Batman series is sooner or later, maybe you do a reboot and start from the beginning all over again and bring a new generation of people in on that format. But we'll have to wait and see how that does. The opening box office weekend, obviously they're going to set a new record for this weekend just because of the number of theaters they're playing in. But we will be able to give you more of a review in our next back and forth after we see the movie, and that will probably give everybody a little bit more idea.
And let's move on to the question. We got lots of questions from clients and from viewers. We certainly appreciate them. One that's been on everyone's mind recently, Kevin, has been inflation. I'll pull it up here. Inflation's come down, but nowhere near what it was before. How long will it take to really get inflation back under control?
Well, and that's the biggest factor, right? I mean, all of a sudden, the ranges have been for most central banks, at least in North America, it's been that 1% to 3% range. And as we saw, we got into the high sort of mid-8s. And then we've come down. I mean, in Canada, we're at 4.3. The Americans aren't that much further behind. So we've had a huge fall from June of last year. But again, now you get to that point where it gets sticky. Do you hit 3%? And if you do, can you go much below? That may be a hard part to get back to 2. Maybe 3 becomes the new norm going forward. So I think it may take us a little while longer yet to get close to that 2% middle range target. I think we can get closer to 3 and probably within the next couple of months to do it. But then I think things start to get sticky, and there's a variety of reasons there for that. You still have, nothing massive in the unemployment department. You still have consumer spending going on. So as long as these things are continuing to take an effect, that's going to hold inflation to a point somewhat. And again, what's government spending going to be like going forward?
Yeah, and part of it, I agree with you. We'll likely see 3% in the near term. I think 6 months, a year for sure. That's the path we're on. But to get under 3 would be quite tough. Not without some kind of recession, because you have wages going up, which is good. People get more money in their pocket, but they're spending it, which means things keep going. And the type of inflation we have now is predominantly in the services sector, which normally means it's connected to wages. That normally doesn't go down. It's the sticky stuff, unless you have a recession and there's unemployment and people get laid off, and then there's less bumps in wages because everything's slowing down. So if we do see a recession, maybe we get back under 2, but I don't know how fast that'll happen. So it could be a while before we actually get under that threshold and get back to this 1-2% that we had in decades past. So maybe 3 is the new norm going forward. I wouldn't be surprised by that.
Yeah, and again, I mean, if people have questions, they can always get in touch with us, ask or go to chatwithclintonandkevin.com, visit our website at beckeror.com. We're more than happy to answer questions on any of the things we've talked about today, be it financial, be it jets, be it movies. We're always there for you if we need any advice as to what's best. Otherwise, I think that we've covered the topics fairly well. And is there anything else you want to add to end this, Clint?
I think we'll end there. Take care, everyone.